Hello, and welcome to this training session on Analysis Expert. This second session for our series on Analysis Expert will continue the discussion and demonstration of the query building process and the analysis of your data. This session will focus more on the addition and modification of criteria and the Analyze Results button. Specifically, we'll discuss how to use different criteria operators. We'll show you how to modify the criteria expression. We'll discuss what to watch out for. We'll take a look at additional analysis through the Analyze Results button. We'll show you another group by function, and we'll wrap by showing you the Analysis Expert auditing section. Let's begin by editing an existing query and take a look at some of the options available for criteria operators. In our Part 1 session, we built a query that narrowed our records to only the open emergency class incidents from Knights Junction. Let's go back in and rebuild that query. We've already got our selections, but let's add in our criteria around our class. Campus, and status. First, we're going to take a look at adding criteria around dates and date ranges. If we include any kind of date information as part of our criteria, we'll see that there's multiple options. Criteria around date ranges can be set up in a few different ways. Some of this list of operators allows us to choose a greater than or less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. However, when we do this, this will add multiple lines to our criteria. If we look at the expression below, we see the three different values in our criteria expression. If we were to add in criteria around a date range for, say, January 1st to today, using the reported date time, we could select our first option. But then we would have to repeat that line by searching by again to add in today's date. Taking a look at that criteria expression, just with the addition of those two values, makes the expression look a little bit more difficult to read. A much easier operator to work with in this particular case is a between or a not between. In both cases, a user can select both dates as well as time in one single value field. The advantage of this is less criteria lines, which, as we'll be able to see, might make the modification of our criteria expression later on a little bit easier. Our criteria expression has less values in it. We'll see with the removal and addition of our criteria line, it's made those brackets seem like they're a little bit out of place. One thing to note, having extra brackets is not necessarily a bad thing as long as the number of brackets match up in the end. We'll discuss more about the brackets coming up in a little bit. Other operators are also available for use when it comes to dates. Operators such as today, in which case you don't need to specify a value. This would show you all of the incidents reported today, or yesterday, this week, this month, or this year, as well as the last number, where we could choose the last number of days, whether it be a value like 1 or 9, or again, we could also choose options such as last week, last number of months, or the last number of years. Now that we have our date criteria on here, let's run this so we can see what it looks like. Once again, as we saw in our Analysis Expert Part 1 session, our results will open in a separate window. Here, we can see in this particular case, because of the addition of our criteria, we have 4 records that match our criteria. Let's go back and let's edit this query to add in another piece of criteria around another class. We can navigate to that class rollups. We can right-click on class and select search by. In this case, let's choose our property incident. When we run this query now, this time we can see we have 0 records, but we did have records prior to this. We had 4 in fact, so we should be able to see at least those 4 records. So why do we have 0 now? There are a couple of keys to understanding Analysis Expert. One is understanding how data is entered in onto the various data forms. The other is understanding Boolean logic and the difference between and or, and its relationship with that data. If we're to go back in and take a closer look at our query, if we go into that Criteria Designer section and take a closer look, if we were to read this expression, it's looking for any records which are A, emergency class, and are B, occurred at Knights Junction, and are open, and are occurred between January 1st of 2014 and today, and are property incident. The problem with this is that on an incident data form, when we're choosing our incident class, it could either be emergency or property incident. We can never select both at the same time. So in this particular case, this last addition of criteria with an and a property incident is the reason that we're getting 0 records. So this criteria expression needs to be modified in order to reflect this. Because by default, Analysis Expert will always put an and in between each of our pieces of criteria. We can change this by deleting or overwriting the and replacing it with an or. Another tip which may be helpful when it comes to modifying a criteria expression is before you make any changes to your ands and your ors, whenever you have multiple lines of criteria like this, reordering the lines and grouping any like criteria together may be useful. Once again, if we were to click on the box just to the left and reposition our criteria to move this up our list, we'll see a couple things happen. Or in this case, a couple of things don't happen. Number one, this does not change the symbol assigned to our criteria, nor does it change the expression down at the bottom of the screen. But what it might allow us to do is when we're grouping this like criteria together, it might make it a little bit easier in the event that we need to modify this criteria expression. We can then rewrite this expression in a way that we know would fit. In this case, all I really have to do is swap out my B and my E, as well as adjust that first and to an or, and replace the last or back to the and. Because really, I'm just swapping those two values. So if we were to take a closer look at this right now, we'd be able to read this as it's looking for any incidents which are emergency or property incident, and are open, and were reported between January 1st and today, and occurred at Knights Junction. If we run this query now, we should see at least those 4 records that we saw the first time around, and if there are any property incidents, we'd be able to see those listed here as well. And indeed, now we're up to 10 records as opposed to the 4 that we had before. If we take a closer look, all are open, all occurred at Knights Junction, and all are either emergency or property incidents. Let's take another look at an example, and this time around, let's add in another campus. So in our Criteria Designer, if we navigate to our site list and add in another campus of, let's say, Queens Quarter, we'll see that adds our criteria. And again, we need to make sure that we change that and to an or. When we execute our query this time, in our results window this time, we can see the list of records jumped up considerably to over 4,300 records. If we take a closer look though, we'll also notice that in our class column, we have values of person incident, security, as well as our emergency and our property incidents. So why are we seeing these extra incidents now? We didn't change any of our criteria around our class. All we did was add in an extra campus. The reason for this is because of the placement of the brackets. So if we close our query results and go back to our query to take a look at our criteria expression, it's not just a matter of having the appropriate and or, but it's also with the placement of that criteria and the order of operation that's being done by the system. Whenever we add in a piece of criteria to our query, the system will add the operator and add in another bracket. And because of the current setup in this criteria expression, it's looking for any incidents which are emergency or property incidents and are open and were reported between January 1st and today and occurred at Knights Junction, or any incident at Queen's Quarter. That last or, because of that placement of the or and the bracket, it's looking for anything that happened at Queen's Quarter, not just the emergency or property class incidents. We can also see that with the addition of this extra piece of criteria and the extra set of brackets, it really makes it a little difficult to work with. So again, if we had grouped our two campuses within brackets as we demonstrated with the class, this query would then return what we're looking for. So let's do that. But let's start right from scratch. Let's group our sites together, just like we did with our classes. Let's delete the expression and start right from scratch. So in this case, we're looking for any incidents that are emergency or property incidents and occurred at Knights Junction or Queen's Quarter and are open and were reported between January 1st and today. So having our appropriate ands and ors in the right spot is step 1 to this expression. Having the brackets in the proper location is step 2. So if we group our classes, A or E, and group our like campuses, B or F, and then one more set of brackets around the entire expression itself, gives us a much cleaner looking expression, but when we run this time, it will give us exactly what we're looking for. So in this case, we can see now we're down to 26 records. If we take a closer look at the actual results themselves, all are open. All are either emergency or property incidents, and all occurred at either Knights Junction or Queen's Quarter. Continuing on with the discussion and understanding of the data forms and the different operators, let's take a look at a couple of other examples and what you might need to watch out for. A common phrase that's mentioned when it comes to reporting is that the data out is only as good as the data in. With that being said, there are times that fields might get missed during the data entry process. While the system is configurable, not every field can be made required. So there may be times where there is data missing on your various records. Another criteria operator that can be used is the isEmpty operator. This will look for missing data from your fields. This can be an advantage if you want to monitor the data entry process of your users, or if you want to ensure that certain fields have a value before you go any further with the analysis or reporting. In terms of what you might need to watch out for with regards to this operator, is that it will be available for almost any field that you wish to add criteria around, just as I've chosen here for my reported date time. This could include required fields. The reported date time field is a system required field. This again is just another example of having a decent knowledge of your data forms and understanding how data is entered in on them so that your queries return the desired results. Since required fields must have data in them before a user can save their record, they can never be empty. Therefore, queries with this criteria operator on a required field would never return any results. Moving on to another example, we saw how class, category, subcategory, and type can all be selected independently, and in the results view, each value will be represented as its own column. A good question to ask yourself is how are you analyzing this data and what do you need from your data? Because there is an alternate option that displays the same detail but in one column of your results as opposed to 4. This is the class rollup name field. We're looking at the class rollup, but please note that this type of field exists for all multi-tier rollups, your class, site, business unit, call category, and so on. You may have noticed that when we added criteria around our class, we could only go as far as that class level. If we also need to add category, subcategory, and or type, again, we could see that we would only be able to select up to that particular level. Criteria around category would only let you select as far as category, subcategory only as far as subcategory, and so on. Adding each level separately like this may be necessary at times. and you'll notice that this might complicate that expression down below by having to add in multiple values. But again, if the format of the rollup name field is acceptable, you can simplify that criteria process, which we'll see in just a few moments. Let's modify this query and first look at what the class rollup name field looks like, as opposed to choosing the 4 values independently. So here we can see our class rollup name displaying up to all 4 levels in one single column, as opposed to having 4 separate columns. Let's go back in and take a look at our query again and modify it to add in criteria using this class rollup name field that looks for all burglaries. So what we'll do here is we'll modify our class rollups. In this case, for this line of criteria, we're going to change this to the class rollup name. But in this case, in our value field, we can choose, as mentioned, up to all 4 levels of our class list. As mentioned, when it comes to our burglaries, we have multiple burglary types available. If we want to look for all of these different types, we'll stop at the burglary level. When we click execute, this will run this query. In our query results, we can see that we have our property incident, theft, burglary, but we can see there's no type specified. But if you noticed in our last example, there was at least one of a type specification. In this case, what we need to watch out for is the operator that we use with this particular field. If we go back and we take a closer look at our criteria, we can see that this is looking for the class rollup name that equals property incident, theft, burglary, which is returning all records where the rollup name exactly matches what we have selected. In this case, just the class, category, and subcategory. Since we wanted to see all types of values, and we couldn't go down another level, otherwise we would have narrowed it to just one type, we need to make a modification to this criteria operator. We don't have to modify the expression itself, just the criteria operator. If we change it from equals to starts with, this will look for any records where the class rollup name starts with property incident, theft, and burglary, and then could be any value for that bottom type field. So here we can see in our results we're now up to 59 records as opposed to the 11 that we saw previously. And in this case we have a mix when it comes to our type of values where there is no type specified or where a value has been selected. In our part 1 session, we talked about child data and how it can be added. But now let's look at this child data with criteria. The process of adding criteria around child data is no different than that which we've already discussed and demonstrated. But where there is a difference is with the results that may be returned. Let's build a new query by deleting our existing criteria as well as our selections. And narrow this right down to include first name, last name, and involvement type. Our criteria will be last name of McIver, and our involvement type will be subject of interest. When we run this particular query, we can see that in our results window we have McIver as our subject of interest and Jeff McIver as our subject of interest. But in both cases we can see there's additional individuals listed here as well. In this particular case, this is not only showing me McIver subject of interest, but also the other people that were involved in those same incidents. If I was to select this particular record and click View Detail, this will open up that read-only view of this particular record. And if I go to my Involvements tab, I'll see Jessica Williams as my responding person and Chantel York as my reported by person. just as we see here. So let's modify this query a little bit more. Let's go back to our query. This time around, let's include our incident number and maintain our criteria. However, in this particular case, let's actually remove the last name, first name, and involvement type. Here we're going to see an example of where we can have criteria on our query that is not a selection. In this particular case, we can see only 2 records are returned. And if we were to select either one of those and view the detail, we'll see that on my involvement, I have Jeff McIver as my subject of interest. So in this case, because we're not displaying this child data, we're just filtering around it, it is narrowing our results quite specifically. Let's take a look at this query one more time. This time, let's put in that first name, last name, and involvement type, but this time let's change it to York and responding persons. When we execute the query this time, we'll see the results that get returned. Here we can see our various incidents. We have York, but as our reported by. We have York again as a reporting person. What we need to watch out for in this type of scenario is that the query will focus on the incidents where York is the last name of any person involved, and responding person was the involvement type, again, for any person. So in this case, the results aren't as specific. We can see, though, that it has returned incidents involving York and incidents involving responding person as the involvement type. The next example that we're going to take a look at is another example of child data. In this case, we're going to take a look at loss information. But for this example, we want to focus not necessarily on the criteria, but where to find these details within the query designer. When searching for loss fields, most people tend to scroll down this list of available forms, and they come across the incident losses. When clicked initially, there aren't any fields to select, but if we expand the node beside it, we'll see beside the losses, we now have some values, including a total. But the question becomes, what is this the total of? On an incident form, when we add a loss, a recovery, or no impact, we must select the associated type. From there, we can associate the loss to the incident as a whole, or to anything that may have been added as an involvement, such as a person, organization, vehicle, or item. With that in mind, the incident losses we just navigated to are only looking at the losses associated to the incident as a whole, and does not include any of the losses that may have been associated with any other involvement. If we were to navigate back to that incident persons, we could see that if we expanded the node beside it, we have incident person losses, recoveries, no impact. Same if we were to navigate to our organizations, vehicles, and items as well. If we want to see a total which includes losses, recoveries, and net losses from all of these, we need to find the total loss, total recovery, and net loss fields. These do exist, we just have to continue down our list of forms. We'll see we come across a form that says Incident Loss Summary. When selected, we can see the field selections for our total loss, total recoveries, net loss, as well as our total averteds and exposures if that's what we're looking for. Let's delete our criteria, add in a few other details, and take a look at what this results look like. So in our query results, we can see there's our total loss. In this case, this is showing us the losses that were associated to the incident as a whole. as opposed to the other column, which is showing us all of the losses associated against the incident, as well as anything that was associated against any of our involvements. Beside each of these columns, we can see we have a symbol that allows us to take an average, a count, a max, a min, a sum, depending on the type of information we want to see. So if I want to see my maximum recovery, if I wanted to use multiple calculations, I can check off as many boxes as I need. All of these calculations will be displayed at the bottom of our window. So here we can see our average total loss, maximum recovery, and all of those calculations in one for our net loss. A couple things to take into account when it comes to averages. While you may have blank values in your columns, this will only take an average of where you actually do have a value, as opposed to the count. In this particular case, the count is counting all of the individual lines within your results grid. Again, in this case, not just where you actually have a net loss. Additional analysis options are available from this window that we haven't looked at yet. In this particular case, the Analyze Results button. When clicked, this will open a new window that allows us to build tables, charts, as well as use a data slicer to analyze our information. First option that we have in this Analyze Results is the ability to show as a table. This table is very similar to a pivot table. What we can see on the right-hand side are the different fields from our query. In the bottom, we can see the different boxes representing the filters, columns, and rows, as well as the measures that can be used within this table. From here, we could click and drag our various fields into the boxes. So if I pulled the class into the columns and campus into the rows, I'd be able to do a count of records. In this case, showing me the number of records of each class type at my various campuses. So I can see I have 1,971 security incidents at King's Corner, 649 person incidents at Brook Plaza, 19 compliance assessments at Knights Junction, and so on. We're not restricted to just one value in our rows and columns. We can pull as much detail into either as needed. If I wanted to pull the reported date time into the columns as well, we'll see this would allow me to do additional analysis. I can see right now below my individual class types, it shows me all periods. I could expand this and see the breakdown by year, by half, quarter, month, even down to the day as needed. Depending on the information that I want displayed here as well, or how I want to view this, I could also click on the Show as Data Chart. This will take the selections that I've already made for both my rows and columns and display this information on a bar graph. I do have the ability in the chart type to change the chart type. I could add in a title and subtitle. I could choose to show marker values, or in essence put point labels on this. Could also enable data point tracking, which allows me to view the numerical value if I hover my mouse over top of a particular bar. In terms of formatting, I could choose to show shadows on the chart. I could show the zoom options if I want to be able to zoom in or out. I could choose to show or hide the legend, as well as adjust the position of it. I can also copy this as an image if I want to paste it into another document, or I could save this as an image if I want to share it later on. There is also a Show as Pie Chart option, where we can see the same data, but in this particular case it's representing the number of incidents by class type at each of my various campuses. I can hover my mouse over top of each section to see the numerical value of that particular section. Once again, I could choose to add a title for this type of chart. I can copy it as an image, or I could save it as an image. Another analysis option that you have from here is a data slicer. On the left-hand side of the screen, we can choose to slice our data by the various values, again, from our query. In this particular case, if we chose that campus that we have selected, we can see right now we're looking at records from all campuses. But if I only wanted to see from Bishop Brownstone, I could select just that. If I want to select multiple values, I can press and hold the Control button on my keyboard and select multiple locations. This will not only update the table, but we'll see this also updates the two different chart types. Another option that we do have from here is the ability to save this data analysis view. Right up above the data slicer is our saved views. Currently, I don't have any saved for this particular query, but if I click on the Add button, I could choose to give this view a name. And when I click Save, that will save this view. I could build different views when it comes to this analysis of records. If I wanted to remove my campus and say choose my record owner instead, I can now see the number of incidents that each of my record owners have created by the different class types. And I could choose to add a view around this as well. If I close my query results, I can come back to this query at any time, and I could rerun it. And if I click on the Analyze Results button again, we can see in my saved views, I can select either one of those two different views that I built, and I can analyze that data and take a look at that information as needed. If I were to share this query with other users, they would also be able to see these views that I've saved if I wanted them to look at something quite specific. Coming back to our query, taking a look at another example, depending on your reporting needs, there is also another group by option that we haven't seen yet, but you may have seen whenever we've added criteria. In this particular case, let's say around our class, when I right click, instead of selecting search by, I could choose group by instead. When we run our query this time, we'll see this will group our results by the different class types, and it's going to perform some calculations on that data. In this case, we can see this will produce a count of our various pieces of information. So we can see a count of our incidents, different reported date times, our various classes, categories, campus details, and so on. As you can see from these results, the group by does not include the detailed information that we saw, like our summary fields or any of the other information that we've seen in our past examples. So depending on what you need for your data and analysis of it, again, you have various options to get the same type of information, whether you do this group by, or whether you were to do the group by within your results window, or go into that Analyze Results and build a table or a chart. For other pieces of calculated data without using this group by function, another form that might be usable for some individuals is to go down to the summary form. Here we can see we can select fields that would display calculated information, such as the total number of involvements, the total number of responses, total response time, time on site, and so on. These fields are specific in this particular case to the incident form, but there's also similar form on our activities as well, depending on the query type that you're building. Last thing that we're going to take a look at in this particular session is the Audit tab. The Audit tab will show you, amongst other details, who last ran a query, when they ran it, how many rows were returned in the results, the duration, as well as what version this was created in. This tab is primarily used by IT and tech support team members for the analysis and troubleshooting of issues, should any arise. Finally, to wrap up this session, we're going to talk a little bit about the custom reports. Analysis Expert is an integral part of the building of any custom reports, since these queries will be supplying the data that populates these reports. This could be in the form of tables, a multitude of charts, crosstabs which are similar to pivot tables in the Analyze Results button that we just saw a moment ago, and so on. With that being said, there are some considerations to think about when it comes to building queries that are going to be used in these reports. The report designer does not allow you to just add multiple queries, but multiple query types into a single report. So if there's a need for you to produce a report with both activity and incident data, you could. Just remember though that they are separate data sources. So while they can be combined in the same report, they could not be combined in the same table or chart. Also, there are functions within the report designer that allow for the sorting, filtering, and calculation of your data. This may be an advantage if you're unsure about what criteria you need to add. But while queries with little to no criteria could be used, if there is a large amount of data that will be returned, it may take a little bit longer for the report to run. Finally, edits can be made to a query at any point for the addition or removal of selections, or for the modification of criteria selections or operators. But if that query is linked to a report, the report will not update with those modifications that you've made. If you started the report building process and realized your query was missing fields or a type of criteria, you would need to stop, delete that report, modify your actual query, and then start building a new report that has that newly modified query linked to it. The exception to this is with criteria values. As demonstrated in previous sessions and in this session, if a query has criteria on it, the user who executes the query does have the ability to change the criteria value at the time of execution. They cannot change the criteria selection, nor can they change the operator, but they can update the value to fit the need of running the query, or in this case, the report as well.